1942, the turning of the tide. Stalingrad. The name becomes synonymous with destruction. In the ruins of this city on the Volga, two vast armies fight for every building, every floor, every room. The battle that will break the Wehrmacht has begun. This is 1942, the year the tide begins to turn. The year opens with disaster for the Allies in every theater. Japan's offensive continues its stunning advance. The British fortress of Singapore, supposedly impregnable, falls on February 15. Over 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops surrender to a smaller Japanese force. Churchill calls it the worst disaster in British military history. The Dutch East Indies fall. Java, Sumatra, Borneo, the oil-rich islands Japan needs to fuel its war machine, are conquered by March. The Philippines fight on, but MacArthur is ordered to escape to Australia. "I shall return," he promises as he leaves Corregidor. Those left behind face death or the horrors of Japanese prison camps. In April, 76,000 American and Filipino soldiers surrender on Bataan. What follows is the Bataan Death March, 65 miles of brutality, murder, and starvation. Over 10,000 die on the march or shortly after. It is a crime that will not be forgotten. Burma falls to the Japanese by May. British and Indian forces retreat into India through impossible terrain. The longest retreat in British military history ends with the monsoon rains. India itself is threatened. Japanese aircraft bomb Ceylon. Japanese submarines prowl the Indian Ocean. The Japanese Empire reaches its maximum extent. From the borders of India to the Central Pacific, from the Aleutian Islands to the Dutch East Indies, the rising sun flies over a vast conquered territory. It seems that nothing can stop the Japanese advance. But the tide is about to turn. In the Coral Sea in May, American and Japanese carrier forces fight the first naval battle in history where the opposing ships never sight each other. Aircraft do all the fighting. The Japanese sink more ships, but they are forced to abandon their attack on Port Moresby in New Guinea. It is the first check to the Japanese advance. Then comes Midway. Admiral Yamamoto plans to lure the American fleet into a trap and destroy it. His target is Midway Island, a vital American outpost in the Central Pacific. But American codebreakers have cracked Japanese naval codes. Admiral Chester Nimitz knows exactly when and where the Japanese will attack. On June 4, 1942, American dive bombers catch the Japanese carriers while their aircraft are being refueled and rearmed on deck. In 5 minutes, 3 carriers are turned into floating infernos. A fourth is sunk later that day. The cream of Japanese naval aviation, pilots who have trained for years, dies in the flames. Midway is the turning point in the Pacific. Japan loses for fleet carriers, irreplaceable aircraft, and hundreds of experienced pilots. The offensive is over. From now on, Japan will be on the defensive. In August, American Marines land on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, the first Allied ground offensive in the Pacific. What follows is 6 months of brutal fighting in disease-ridden jungles. The Japanese fight with suicidal determination. The Marines fight with equal courage. The battles around Guadalcanal are vicious: Henderson Field, Bloody Ridge, the naval battles of Savo Island and Iron Bottom Sound. Both sides pour in reinforcements. Both sides suffer terrible losses. In February 1943, the Japanese evacuate what remains of their garrison. The first rung on the ladder to Tokyo has been seized. In North Africa, Rommel strikes again. In May and June, his Afrika Korps smashes through British defences and captures Tobruk. The garrison of 35,000 surrenders. It is another humiliation for British arms. Rommel drives into Egypt, threatening Cairo and the Suez Canal. German victory in North Africa seems imminent. But his supply lines are stretched to breaking, and a new British commander arrives to face him, Bernard Montgomery. At El Alamein in October, Montgomery attacks with overwhelming force, 195,000 men against Rommel's 104,000. The battle rages for 12 days. When it ends, Rommel's army is shattered. The Afrika Korps retreats westward, never to threaten Egypt again. Before Alamein we never had a victory, Churchill observes. After Alamein we never had a defeat. It is an exaggeration, but the symbolic importance of Alamein is real. Britain has finally won a clear, decisive victory against Germany. Days after Alamein, American and British forces land in French North Africa, Operation Torch. General Dwight Eisenhower commands the first major American ground operation against Germany. Algeria and Morocco are secured against light Vichy French resistance. The Axis forces in North Africa are now caught between Montgomery advancing from the east and Eisenhower from the west. Rommel fights brilliant delaying actions, bloodying the inexperienced Americans at Kasserine Pass. But the end is inevitable. In May 1943, over 230,000 German and Italian soldiers will surrender in Tunisia. But the decisive struggle of 1942 is in the Soviet Union. After the disaster before Moscow, Hitler plans a summer offensive, not toward Moscow, but south toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. Germany desperately needs fuel. Without Caucasian oil, the Wehrmacht cannot continue. The offensive begins in June and achieves massive gains. German forces sweep across the southern steppes, advancing hundreds of miles. But then Hitler makes a fateful decision. He divides his forces, sending one army toward the Caucasus oil fields and another toward the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. Stalingrad has little military value. But it bears Stalin's name. It is a symbol. Hitler becomes obsessed with capturing it. Stalin becomes equally obsessed with holding it. The German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, reaches Stalingrad in late August. What follows is the most brutal urban combat in history. The city stretches for miles along the Volga's western bank. Soviet troops are pushed back to the river's edge, clinging to a few hundred yards of rubble. German soldiers fight through the ruins block by block, building by building, room by room. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad is 24 hours. The fighting is medieval in its savagery. Soldiers fight with bayonets, knives, sharpened shovels. Snipers duel in the ruins. Small groups of men battle for a single staircase for days on end. The grain elevator changes hands repeatedly. The railway station changes hands 15 times in 5 days. Both sides feed reinforcements into the meat grinder. Soviet soldiers are ferried across the Volga under constant fire. German divisions that entered the city with 10,000 men are ground down to a few hundred. Neither side will give up. For us there is no land beyond the Volga, the Soviet slogan declares. And they hold. While the Germans exhaust themselves in the city, Soviet forces mass on their flanks. The flanks are held by weaker Romanian and Italian armies. On November 19, the Soviets strike. Operation Uranus. 1,000,000 Soviet soldiers, 13,500 artillery pieces, 900 tanks smash into the Axis flanks north and south of Stalingrad. The Romanian armies collapse. Within 4 days, the Soviet pincers meet west of Stalingrad. The Sixth Army, 300,000 men, is encircled. Hitler forbids any attempt to break out. Goering promises the Luftwaffe can supply the trapped army by air. It cannot. The required tonnage is impossible to deliver. The Sixth Army slowly starves and freezes. A relief attempt in December fails. The surrounded soldiers eat their horses, then rats, then nothing. Temperatures plunge to 40 below zero. Men die of hunger, cold, and disease as much as from Soviet attacks. On January 31, 1943, Paulus surrenders. Hitler had made him a field marshal the day before. No German field marshal had ever surrendered, expecting him to kill himself. Paulus chooses life. Over 91,000 Germans march into Soviet captivity. Fewer than 6,000 will ever see Germany again. Stalingrad is the death knell of the German war effort. The myth of Wehrmacht invincibility dies in the frozen ruins. An entire army has been destroyed. The road to Berlin is still long, but now it is Germany that must defend. The year 1942 also marks the implementation of the final solution. At the 1C conference in January, Nazi officials coordinate the systematic murder of European Jews. The death camps begin operating